geographers in the UK. He joined the School of Geography and Environment at the University of Oxford in 2013. He holds the Halford Mackinder Chair in Human Geography. It's one of the oldest chairs in human geography in the world. Previous holders were David Harvey, Gordon Clark and others. Prior to this, of course, you were in Sheffield, Danny, and of course one of the reasons I'm here is I arrived and took Danny's office in September 2013. The phone went 20 times in between September and Christmas. 19 calls were for Danny, and only one for me, and it was my mother. So even though he'd left, his legacy left it goes on. Prior to this, he was at Newcastle, Bristol, Leeds, and New Zealand, and travelled, an important geographer. What's important about Danny's work is its academic reach, but also his policy reach. He's well known for public engagement, for political engagement, for engaging and talking on popular topics around the world, and this is why he's here today. He's the author of several prominent texts, the Atlas of Real World, note the notion on real world and why he's significant here today, Mapping the Way We Live, Bankrupt Britain, an Atlas of Social Change, and of course the author of 10 Billion, which is of course why you're here today, Danny. Joined by Carl Lee. Carl been in Sheffield for a few years after a long career teaching in further education. They've authored together as well, so to have two here I think is really, really important. They're a writing team, and they also make individual contributions at the same time. Works in lifelong learning, research interests. Carl's interests are in heterodox economics and sustainable development. Together they revealed that geography as a science, this was the book we wrote a few years ago, tackles all the biggest issues that we face today. So they're important geographers, from globalisation to equality, from sustainability to population growth, from climate change to changing technology. And what they're interested in as geographers, and I'm a human geographer, so I'm proud to have them here, is that us geographers look at the complex interactions in the world and the interconnections between events, the interconnections between theory and data, and the interconnections between people and place and policy and politics, which are some of the things that they'll talk on today. So this is their contribution. I think we are delighted to have them here. They'll talk together, do a double act for about 40 minutes, and you get your opportunity as an audience to ask questions. So please, ask questions and let's have a lively discussion around this very important topic. So shall we have a round of applause to kick off their lecture, please.
I'm just going to briefly introduce what we're going to do this late afternoon. A few years ago, 3 years ago, I wrote a book called Everything is Connected to Everything Else. And when I was researching the population aspect of that particular book, I was using UN data from the, I think it's 2005. And just as I was about to finish the book, there was a new revision had come out. I was aware of the 2011 revision. And it pushed up the overall total population that the UN were predicting, and also when this was actually going to achieve. And this sort of put me in a bit of a tailspin at that time, because I wasn't quite sure whether I was talking about 10 billion or 11 billion or 12 billion. Since then, there's been a further revision by the UN of in 2015, which has also pushed the numbers up and also pushed the time frame up as well. And this has been a conversation, ongoing conversation between me and Danny over quite a number of years. And to some extent, what we're going to do and explore this afternoon is an argument, not really an argument, a discussion to some degree that we sort of keep coming back to, like a boomerang being thrown away and coming back to this particular issue. So in a way, what we're going to try to explore with you, with your help as well later on, is the notion of 10 billion or 11 billion or 12 billion and what it actually means, and what if you like, the processes that will influence where we actually end up over the 21st century. When Danny did his book 10 Billion in 2013, it came out at the same time with a book by a guy by Stephen Emmer. I think it would be fair to say that his book probably outsold yours a little bit, probably about 8 to 1 or something along those lines. But it's easy to understand why Stephen's book did outsell, because his view of 10 billion was a very dystopian view. And his famous strapline to it was that in the end we are fucked as a consequence of 10 billion. Both me and Danny tend to draw our inspiration from a sort of a way of geography which we would call practical possibilism. That we can actually look at these challenges that we face and believe them not to be necessarily intractable challenges. So we're really trying to investigate these things by applying a scientific process and by looking at how we can look at the information that we have and the processes that we understand to try to understand a little bit more about the future that these changes may bring. So I'm just going to pass you over to Danny, who's going to take you through some data to start with.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's going to be a few graphs. The end of Stephen Emmett's book, he advised that if you have a son, you should teach your son how to shoot. Because of the Armageddon that was to come, you'd have to learn how to kill and use a gun. What you really want is a daughter if there's an Armageddon. She's much more likely to reproduce than a son. But also you wouldn't want to teach them to shoot because you'd quickly run out of bullets and guns. So if you want to go down a dystopian route, teach your children to shoot a bow and arrow, because we'll have those for longer. But I don't believe that's where we're heading. This is the most important graph that was in population 10 billion. And it's of the change, the annual change in population each year from 1820 to around the year 2000. And you're going to get about 8 of these kind of graphs, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of big issues. And we're going to leave lots of time for you to ask questions. This is crucial. For hundreds of years before this, we had very low population growth, and sometimes falls when there were plagues and famines. Around about 1820, an acceleration began. The increase in population every year became bigger than the increase the year before. We were only just over 1 billion people by 1820. By the time we get up to the year 2000, we're heading towards 7 billion. The last time that human population increased 7-fold on the planet was the Neolithic Revolution. That's a very, very long time ago. And that occurred over many more generations in different parts of the world. This was worldwide. This was just 6 generations. This is an algae bloom of a species. It began at the time when Charles Darwin was writing about lettuces and elephants, and how every so often, in the case of elephants, you could see an explosion. It was very rare, but you might get one. And the real irony of this is that Charles Darwin was writing about population explosions in species just at the point when our population explosion began. Now you have to remember, we didn't even know we were a species before then. The amount that we now know, or think we know, compared to the beginning of this time series, is absolutely incredible. Why did it happen? It happened because of us. It had to be somebody. If you want, you can blame the Spanish and the Portuguese a bit more than us. But somebody went round the world destroying all those stable social systems which had kept population steady for centuries and in cases millennia, if you look at Australia. And it was us. We went round, we invaded countries, we created colonies, we destroyed stable social systems, we set in place the population boom of the world. We had our own little population boom first. It happened with enclosure. Our population boom was so big that we sent out far more people to live in other countries of the world than have ever come back here. It ends around about 1971. You can see the four horsemen of the apocalypse in there, in terms of war, famine, disease, and so on. You can see the effects of those, but they simply dent this incredible acceleration up to about 2.1% growth by 1971. And then it comes down. That little oscillation as it's coming down, that is the East African famine. That's, if you're old enough, you have to be my age, I think now, to remember Feed the World and all those kind of things. That was that. It's currently around about here. And the last 5 years, its downward speed has accelerated. And this is important. There are huge, huge variations in the projections that United Nations produce. They tend to produce them every couple of years. They say that these error bands, everybody ignores the error bands because we want to know, is it going to be 12, 11, 10? I'll put my money on 9 or 8, as I'll show you in a minute. But of course, fertility now results in many more people in the future. A faster deceleration now, which is what we're seeing at the moment. A move towards a one-child norm, which is what we're getting in many cities in Asia. And you actually head below the median line. Nobody ever looked below the median line. You just look at the median projection or above it. But I tempt you to look below it. That ridiculous thing that zooms off to 30 billion is what happens if there is no continued slowdown. You are the slowdown, most of you sitting in this room. The most effective contraception known to human beings is to go to university. It's far more effective than anything else. Over half of all young women in England now go to university. Majority of graduates in the world are women. That's another way of looking at these trends. I think this is a 2015, the latest UN projection. There'll be some more coming out this year. It's about every 2 years you get them. I think they're going to dip. There's that 2.1% peak growth, and there's the population heading towards 11 billion just over 80 years from now. What's incredible is how we really don't know what's going to happen 80 years from now, or even 20 years from now, or even 10 years from now. But I want you to think that it's possible that the growth will actually be lower than the UN say, and I'll show you why, but also why it doesn't really matter whether it is 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12. What matters is how we behave. The most complicated graph, and I'm showing you this because the book I wrote, Population 10 Billion, is twice as long as it should have been if I knew how to write a book. So it's too thick. And if you write a book that's too thick, nobody makes it to the last quarter of the book. And the last quarter of the book is the only part of the book where I have the only innovative idea in it. And I'm a bit annoyed that, I could well be very wrong with this idea. But let me show it to you. This is the change in change. Up to now, I've just shown you the change, which peaked at 2.1% growth in 1971. But this is the change in the change each year. It's real data up to about 2010. So in the 1960s, we had population increase, and the increase was increasing by about 1 million people a year. Before the early 1970s, that reached 3-4 million a year. Increase on the increase. It's the change in change. I won't labour it because I suspect most of you really don't want to know about this particular thing, but if you're interested in these numbers, it's worth looking at. After 2010, that's the United Nations predictions of change in change. It'll be slightly below 0 and then we'll head towards a steady state. The UN long-term predictions are that every couple in the world will have 2 children forever, from about 2100 to the entirety of the future. They produced estimates for 2,300 a few years ago. They don't do it anymore. And that just says stability. We're all going to have 2 children, Peter and Jane, and we'll be stable. What I've drawn here, that jagged line going down, is a different model. Very different model, very arrogant of me. I don't spend all my time on floor 27 in the UN building in New York, worrying about these things, collecting. What they have to do is they have to collect estimates from all countries of the world, merge them. For political reasons, they can't really go and tell China that their estimates are wrong and they're going to ignore them. They make assumptions. They've made assumptions that we will head towards 2 children per couple, including in all those countries, about half the world is below 2 children, that somehow they'll go up. And that's why they get their particular estimates. But if you go for that jaggedy line that I've drawn, which I think fits the data better, you get many less people in future. But why would it be a jaggedy line? Well, have a look at the peaks that have happened, the peaks that we know about, and have a look at the gap between them. top of going to university. These peaks are the echoes of baby booms, I think. We can't go back before 1950 because we absolutely have appalling data before 1950 for most of the world. In fact, we have pretty appalling data for most of the world at the moment. You really shouldn't take much of this data as being that safe. But these are echoes of a baby boom. We had our first baby boom in 1919, after years of slaughter. We had 1 million babies in 1990. But most of the world had its baby boom shortly after the Second World War. The Second World War wasn't the most important reason. There was a revolution in China. That resulted in the baby boom. Independence in India. All these events come together and you have more babies. How do we know we have more babies? Because you can look at the numbers of people alive afterwards. We were not recording the babies at the time. And then you look at the babies that they had. I'm a second generation 1960s echo of a baby boom. My children are echoes of a baby boom. And then you see that. And if that is what's going on, then this projection isn't right.
It's worth, I'm just going to butt in here. Danny's data goes up to 2010, but a couple of weeks ago I went back and had a look at all the additions since then, and the pattern is holding. It is falling. The change is going down. Not quite as fast as you predicted, but it's in the direction that Danny predicted. And you can go and have a look at the data sets and try this for yourself. Get your calculator out and work it all out for yourself. It is going in that direction.
Okay, so here's the 10 billion projection. The US produced balancing data for 2011. This red line is their basis, which gets us up to about 11 billion by the year 2100. That's the red line, that's the black line, they're the easy lines. The purple line and the thin line are the change in change. And the thin black line is the original change in change, and the purple one is the alteration that the unit made.
Picking up on one of the themes that Danny was talking about, and we're just going to focus in on fertility here rather than the ageing aspect of it, which is maybe a little remiss of us. It's interesting to consider over the next century as it unfolds what will be potentially the variables, the events that will actually impact upon future levels of fertility. And Danny alluded to a couple of them there, and we've got a sort of slide here which tries to explore what some of those events may actually be, and we'll take that a little bit further in a while. Of course, one of the things that really does drive forward fertility is instability and war. And if we find ourselves in a pattern in the 21st century moving towards greater levels of instability, both within countries and between countries, we may find ourselves with higher fertility rates. So one of the things that the events that we need to be aware of is this idea of greater levels of instability in various parts of the world, which will also increase levels of migration potentially from areas of high fertility into areas of low fertility. But of course, there are other events that come into play, and perhaps one of the greatest events and one of the most important events is the increasing equality of women at a global level. I say increasing because we clearly have got some distance to travel in terms of that, but perhaps one of the most effective ways of reducing fertility rates is for greater equality to be achieved within a gender perspective, but also, as we're going to show in another slide in a little while, also inequality from an economic perspective as well. The more we can reduce inequality both between countries and within countries, this will also result in the probability of lower fertility rates. It'll also perhaps lead to be offset to some degree. I don't know what you think about this, Danny. I think it may lead to greater life expectancy. So maybe they might balance themselves out a little bit in terms of reduced fertility but greater life expectancy in these types of circumstances. What would your feeling about that be?
We've got life expectancy falling slightly now in the UK for the first time for a long time, which with some colleagues who published 2 papers today saying it's due to the cuts, and understandably government has got somewhat upset that we said that they had killed 30 lots of people. We asked them to say what number they thought they had killed.
I was greatly amused actually to see your name on the front page of the Daily Mirror today, and it was a scandal, but it wasn't a sex scandal as such. It was it was a government scandal that your name was associated with. Pointing it out.
It's hard to tell. I mean, Japan is the country which is trying to get away with very old age without immigration, so they're designing robotic nurses because they would rather have robots. Some people in Japan and Filipino nurses. I don't know. The idea of having a robot at the end of my life looking after me, but it'd be better than nothing, which unfortunately is where we're heading towards in Britain at the moment. That's what we've seen in the last 2 weeks on the telly screen.
Some of the other factors that may influence fertility rates over the 21st century are different states' attitudes towards population. We've got President Erdogan of Turkey here, who has exhorted particular parts of Turkish society to have more children. And there is, in certain states, this idea. America is another example of this. Many groups in America, particularly in the sort of alt-right spectrum, are very encouraging of high fertility rates as well. And so the events that may influence fertility that will unfold in the 21st century are very, very difficult to predict. And they tend to be events that are framed around socio-political and economic circumstances.
They're paying people to have children. They still have fewer children for women in Istanbul than they have in London, and that's still less than 1.9. Putin is paying women to have children in Russia. We don't learn that class. We still have...
Is that with him? Who knows?
It's not Genghis Khan.
All right.
Yeah, but we don't advance as fast as we think we advance. That's worth learning. The fact we still have
Yeah, and I mean, even people like Mary Stopes in her famous work, what was it, Married Love, and her name's been associated with reducing fertility at a global level. She was a member of the Eugenetics Society and campaigned vigorously for the sterilisation of what she called feeble-minded and revolutionary women as well that needed to be sterilised.
One of their arguments, was that we were really weak human beings, and so you wanted the elite who are vigorous to have more children, which was always them. Nobody ever writes about these things thinking they're not an elite. And if you allowed the lower orders to breed, that would create a very weak race and a very weak humanity. We know this is untrue now, because a few years ago we had the biggest ever drop in infant mortality, went from 42 per thousand in 1 year to 40 in 1 year. I celebrated it in the book. Since then, the falls in infant mortality have actually accelerated. They are unbelievably fast at the moment. They are so fast that if they were continued at the current rate, not a single child in the world would die before their first birthday in 2030. So that's not going to happen. So what that tells you is that this is the best it ever gets. You're living through a year or a couple of years of the best ever improvement in infant mortality that the world will ever see, the biggest ever drop in grieving parents that the world will ever experience, and for some reason the BBC News is not full of this. They don't worry about some fat bloke with strange coloured hair in America. They don't tell you about good news. And this is one reason I think to be optimistic, because when you know that your child will almost certainly survive and live longer than you, the impetus to have another child and a spare child is far, far less. And this is very, very recent. When my grandparents were born, which was around about 1905, 1 in 10 of the babies of the servant keeping classes, the richest people in Britain, 1 in 10 of their babies died in the first year of life. And we've gone from that normality for the best of people through to a position now where you really would be very unlucky to have a child and for that child not to live longer than you now.
Some of you may have been at Tony Ryan's talk on Monday, and Tony focused in to some degree on the challenge of whatever the growth of population is over the 21st century, of feeding that population. But I've chosen this slide. I just want to show this slide before we move on towards the end. That it shows that in terms of food supply, in terms of the kilocalories that we are taking on board at the moment, because of the application of huge amounts of energy to food production, we are actually intriguingly better fed today than really at any point in our history. Now, can we carry that on into the 21st century? That's an intriguing challenge that we have to face, and it's very interesting that in this university, University of Sheffield, and many other universities around the world, this is one of the key research focuses that people are engaged in the Grantham Institute at the University of Sheffield. But there are some really straightforward, basic ways that we could address the need to add this quadrillion kilocalories a year that we would need to feed an additional 1 billion people. And perhaps the simplest way to do it is to actually change how we eat, to have also a more distributive, more effective distributive food system as well, but also to apply some core understandings of science in terms of how we use energy in food production and how we maintain ecological quality. And perhaps the one key thing, and this is something that Tony said, which I would absolutely nail my colours to, we need to learn to look after soil. Soil is one of the most fundamental things that we need to take care of in order to address this. And it is a challenging problem. I probably think it's a more challenging problem than Danny.
You like soil?
I like soil. Danny's sort of a bit more ambivalent about soil.
Your geography teacher and how exciting they can make soil.
I've struggled making soil sexy, but really it is. You need to get into the notion of soil.
Carl and I were in China a few months ago in the geography department there, where they had slices of soil on the walls because
in China, when we asked it,
Nobody. Not one. And when we told them that in the future there would be vegetarians in China, and even some of them will become vegetarians and their children would, the look of horror and disbelief on their faces, how could you possibly not eat meat?
yeah, and the final slide that we want to draw your attention to before we start taking some questions is this. This is from Branko Milanović's recent book on global inequality. And it's been much publicised, this particular graph, because people have used it as an explanation to show why we've been so squeezed in places like Britain and America and have then politically sort of moved towards a rejection of globalisation. But what Milanović does here is he shows that for the vast majority of the world's population, the last 20 years of globalisation have seen significant improvements in their quality of life. And it's those medium deciles that you see there, the rising incomes in emerging economies in mainly China, but also Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia, those are the places where fertility is falling the fastest. The more equal we become, and we are probably globally more equal now than we have been since maybe 200 years ago, globally, because we've expanded inequality over that period. Now we're starting to narrow it, that inequality, and that reduction of inequality between countries, we're not focusing on inequality within countries, is one of the key drivers that is actually going to maintain our fall in fertility. So although we politically seem to be moving towards a rejection of globalisation with what's going on in America with Brexit and a number of other things that are going on in other European countries, from a fertility point of view, the process of globalisation has been one of the drivers that has actually kept fertility or reduced fertility in many of those countries. And it's those middle people, the average human being, who's probably somebody who works in a factory in a mid-sized city in China, their standard of living has increased significantly, as you can see from the graph, over the last 20 years. And it's that increase in their material quality of life, their standard of living, which has been one of the drivers, not the only one, but one of the drivers in reducing fertility rates.
If you want to reduce fertility rates fastest, the biggest growth is in this part of the world, the poorest 15%, of which the poorest have seen no improvement over 2 decades. So therefore, 2 decades ago, no more money. That is where you would intervene if you want to slow things down with some kind of intervention. If you thought you were clever enough how you did it. This is us. This is the poorest of us, i.e. richer than 70, 80% of people in the world. And that's some of the best of us. And this is why we feel glum, because we're down here. But us being down here, and it's not just us, it's most of Europe to varying degrees, it's North America, it's part of Japan. The actual fall in GDP per capita and in income in the richest parts of the world in the last 10 years is the fastest move towards global equality that has been for 200 years. It's just that you don't stand up, because I'm doing now in Britain and say, biggest recession since 1929, isn't that helping reduce global inequality? But of course it is. It actually is. And there is no other way you could have moved as rapidly towards less inequality of income and wealth in the world than what we're currently experiencing, and what we may experience for the next 10 or 20 years. But we have no plan for this. We have no plan for no growth. All our plans are, we will become great again in some way and get richer every year again, as happened in 2005 and 2004.
Okay, that's sort of exploring some of the ideas that me and Danny have sort of kicked around and will continue to kick around in all sorts of settings. You'll probably sense that there's a little bit of travel between us. I probably have a greater, I don't know, I was going to use the word concern. I'm not sure concern's the right word, but I tend to think and perhaps Danny does. And this is sometimes the grit between us. But, of course, it's those discussions that we have, kicking those ideas around and looking at the errors, thinking about how all of these things will play out, that we are... Was it? Oh, yeah. OK, I'll just hang on to it. Are really what we are interested in. So we're really interested in hearing, responding to, if we can, some of your own observations of the material that we've presented. We'll get to you, Steve. Don't worry.